Burkina Faso has done the unthinkable. In just 7 days, this small West African nation shook the entire global order, not with tanks, not with bombs, but with something far more dangerous to empire: gold. For decades, gold flowed out of Burkina Faso and into the vaults of foreign companies, foreign banks, and foreign capitals. The people who dug the gold lived in poverty, while those who never touched the soil grew rich. It was the same colonial story, written again and again across Africa: resources stolen, nations weakened, leaders silenced. But this time, the story changed. In what many are calling the gold coup, Burkina Faso seized control of its mines, reclaiming the resource that has always been the lifeblood of empires. Within hours, investors in Europe and America panicked. Stocks of mining giants plummeted. Calls rang in Western capitals, filled with rage and fear. This wasn't just about Burkina Faso. It was about a dangerous example being set, an example that Africa could reclaim what is hers. For the first time in modern history, a nation declared to the world, "Our gold will serve our people, not your corporations." And with that, the balance of power began to shift. But this was not just economics. This was war, a war of sovereignty, a war of dignity, a war of survival. And it began not with weapons, but with a simple truth: the wealth beneath Africa's soil belongs to Africa. This is the story of Burkina Faso's 7-day gold rush to fame, and how one nation turned a mineral into a weapon against global dependence. The West was not ready. For decades, they had written the script. Africa was to be a supplier of raw materials, nothing more. Gold, cocoa, uranium, oil, dug up, shipped out, sold cheap. Then Africa would import finished products at 10 times the price. This cycle of dependence was the empire's greatest weapon, and gold was its sharpest blade. But when Burkina Faso declared its mines national property, the empire trembled. In Paris, ministers gathered in urgent meetings. In Washington, financial analysts sounded alarms. In London, bankers feared the domino effect: if Burkina Faso can do this, what about Mali? What about Niger? What about Congo? The panic was not just about losing gold. It was about losing control. For centuries, empire survived not by armies alone, but by psychology. Africans were told they could not survive without Western investors. That their economies would collapse without foreign capital. That sovereignty was impossible without colonial guidance. But the gold coup shattered that illusion. In just 7 days, Burkina Faso proved a nation could stand, take back its wealth, and still survive. And empire knows one truth better than anyone: when one colony breaks its chains, others begin to see the cracks. That is why this coup mattered. It was not about Burkina Faso alone. It was about Africa's awakening. Burkina Faso, a landlocked nation often dismissed on global maps, spoken of only in whispers in foreign capitals, suddenly became the epicenter of a political earthquake. Not with the roar of tanks, not with the sound of missiles, but with something far more devastating to empires: the sound of chains breaking. For decades, Burkina Faso's gold glittered in the markets of London, Paris, and New York. Multinational corporations dug deep into the soil, extracted fortunes, and left behind craters of poverty. The villagers who worked under the burning sun saw little more than dust, while billions were made elsewhere. It was the oldest trick in the imperial playbook: make the source rich for the world but barren for its people. But then came what the world now calls the gold coup. In just 7 days, Burkina Faso seized control of its mines. It wasn't just a policy shift, it was an act of war against an entire system. Overnight, the balance of power changed. Investors panicked. Shares in mining giants plunged. CEOs sat at long mahogany tables in Paris and London, clutching their phones with trembling hands, asking the same question over and over: how could this happen? The empire that thought itself untouchable was shaken, not by bombs, but by a truth too long ignored: Africa has the right to her own wealth. For the people of Burkina Faso, the moment was electrifying. In marketplaces from Ouagadougou to Kaya, voices rose in song. Men and women who had watched their resources stolen for generations stood taller, prouder. The gold is ours, they said, and it will serve us now. But with pride came fear. The memory of Thomas Sankara, gunned down for daring to dream of self-reliance, lingered like a shadow. The fate of Patrice Lumumba, silenced for defying empire, weighed heavy. The ghost of Muammar Gaddafi, bombed for daring to challenge Western dominance, whispered warnings. Everyone knew the risks. Seizing gold meant seizing independence, and independence meant making enemies. Not just political enemies, but financial ones. Enemies who controlled not only banks and armies, but the very narrative of what freedom means. The coup was not fought in silence. The world saw it, felt it. Newsrooms in Washington called it reckless. Analysts in London called it suicidal. Politicians in Paris muttered words like instability and illegitimate. But for the people on the ground, it was not instability, it was liberation. A farmer in Bobo Dioulasso said it best: for once, the gold will not buy champagne in France. For once, it will buy bread in Burkina Faso. This was more than a national policy. This was a continental signal flare. A message sent to Mali, to Niger, to Congo, to Guinea: if Burkina Faso can reclaim its gold, then so can you. If Burkina Faso can stare down empire, then maybe Africa is not as powerless as they want us to believe. In just 7 days, a nation often written off as poor showed the world the true definition of wealth. Wealth was not in foreign contracts signed in European boardrooms. Wealth was in the soil, in the sweat of miners, in the dignity of reclaiming what had been stolen. And so, the gold coup was born. The beginning of a story not just about Burkina Faso, but about Africa itself. The West called it dangerous. The people called it justice. And history will call it something else entirely. The weak Africa remembered her worth. But make no mistake, this was a gamble. To take on foreign powers, to seize gold from multinational giants, was to invite retaliation. Sanctions, sabotage, assassinations, Africa has seen them all. The question was not whether the empire would strike back. The question was when, and how hard. Inside Burkina Faso, the people knew the risks. They had seen what happened to leaders who stood up before: Thomas Sankara, Patrice Lumumba, Muammar Gaddafi. All of them dared to defy empire. All of them paid the price. Yet, despite the danger, the people celebrated. Markets erupted in song. Villagers gathered in pride. Young people declared they would defend their mines with their lives. Because for the first time, the gold in the ground was no longer a curse. It was hope. The government promised that this gold would build schools, hospitals, and industries. That for once, the wealth of Burkina Faso would serve Burkinabe. But promises are one thing. Delivering them under global pressure is another. This was the gamble. Could Burkina Faso survive the wrath of empire long enough to turn its gold into freedom? Or would the world watch another African dream crushed under the weight of foreign greed? To understand the stakes, we must look deeper. Gold is not just a mineral. It is the backbone of global finance. It backs currencies, secures loans, and fuels industries. Without African gold, many Western economies would crumble. But here lies the hidden truth: Africa has always been the world's gold mine. From the empires of Mali and Ghana that once dazzled the world with their wealth, to the modern-day mines of Burkina Faso, South Africa, and Congo, Africa's gold has been the secret engine of global power. Yet, Africans themselves remained poor. That was by design. Empire never wanted Africa rich. A rich Africa would be a free Africa. And a free Africa would break the world order. The gold coup of Burkina Faso exposed this hidden war. It told the world, we see your game, and we will no longer play it. By seizing control of its mines, Burkina Faso did more than reclaim a resource. It struck at the heart of empire's power. And empires do not forgive easily. Already, whispers spread of destabilization. Of militias funded in the shadows. Of media campaigns painting Burkina Faso as unstable. Of threats delivered behind closed doors. Because empire knows, if the gold coup succeeds, Africa's chains will shatter. And if it fails, the chains will tighten once more. But the gold coup was not only felt in Africa. Across oceans, in the cities of Europe and America, the African diaspora watched with pride. For generations, they had seen their homeland exploited. They had carried the wounds of history, the pain of slavery, the scars of colonialism. When Burkina Faso seized its gold, the diaspora felt a spark of hope. They saw in Traore's defiance a continuation of the struggle their ancestors began. From Harlem to London, from Paris to Sao Paulo, voices rose, Africa is waking up. The saying spread online like wildfire, I am because we are, and we are because I am. The diaspora understood that Africa's freedom was their freedom. That sovereignty at home meant dignity abroad. For the first time in years, African pride surged across borders. Music, art, and literature echoed with defiance. Hashtags trended worldwide. Burkina Faso, once ignored by global media, was now at the center of a storm. The diaspora saw in the gold coup not just economics, but identity. A reminder that Africa was not weak, not broken, not dependent. Africa was powerful, and its people, wherever they lived, carried that power within them. And so we arrive at the question, what now? The gold coup is not the end of the story. It is only the beginning. The empire will fight back. Burkina Faso will struggle. Mistakes will be made. Sacrifices will be demanded. But something irreversible has happened. The illusion has shattered. The idea has spread. Africa knows its wealth belongs to Africa. The gold beneath Burkina Faso's soil is no longer just a resource. It is a weapon, not of war, but of independence. A weapon to build schools instead of prisons. To heal children instead of arming soldiers. To power cities instead of foreign factories. The gold coup is a reminder to every African nation, sovereignty is possible, but it must be seized. Freedom is not given, it is taken. Dignity is not requested, it is demanded. And to the world, Burkina Faso sends this message, Africa is no longer your gold mine. Africa is no longer your playground. Africa is no longer your silent partner in exploitation. This is a new era. An era where Africa writes its future, not in contracts signed abroad, but in gold, in courage, and in unity. As the African diaspora saying goes, I am because we are, and we are because I am. And now, the world knows, we are Africa, and Africa will rise. When news of Burkina Faso's gold coup broke, it traveled faster than fire in dry grass. Within hours, the ripple turned into a wave, and that wave crashed hard into the capitals of Europe and America. In Paris, the shock was immediate. France, the self-proclaimed guardian of Francophone Africa, suddenly realized its grip was slipping. Ministers called emergency meetings. Analysts filled television screens with grave warnings. The headlines were written in panic, Burkina Faso nationalizes gold mines, chaos looms in West Africa. But behind the headlines, the real fear was quieter, deeper. France wasn't just worried about gold. It was worried about the domino effect. Because if Burkina Faso could do this, so could Mali. So could Niger. So could every nation whose wealth was still chained to Paris through the CFA franc and colonial contracts written decades ago. France trembled, not because of what was taken, but because of what could follow. In London, bankers at the London Bullion Market Association, the very hub of global gold trading, watched prices twitch nervously. Traders whispered of uncertainty. Investors moved their funds like gamblers folding too soon. Every ounce of gold that left Africa unchallenged had once been a guarantee of Western stability. Now, for the first time, that guarantee looked fragile. Washington reacted differently. The United States, less tied to Burkina Faso but deeply invested in global stability, saw a threat to the system itself. Gold wasn't just a metal, it was leverage. It was collateral for loans, a backbone for currencies, a silent partner in empire. And if Africa started pulling that backbone away, the entire skeleton of global finance could start to wobble. Meetings at the IMF and World Bank turned tense. Whispers of instability echoed in conference rooms. Sanctions were discussed. Threats were drafted. Soft power turned sharp. Because beneath the diplomacy, everyone in those rooms knew the truth, a precedent had been set. The reaction was not only political. It was psychological. For centuries, Africa had been cast as dependent, unable to survive without the guidance and capital of the West. Western leaders lectured African nations like schoolchildren, reminding them of their place in the order of things. But the gold coup shattered that illusion. It screamed to the world, we can stand, we can take back what is ours, and we can survive without you. And empire knows this better than anyone, ideas are contagious. If one nation breaks the chains, others begin to see the cracks. The danger was not Burkina Faso alone. The danger was the spark of imagination spreading across the continent. Already, in Bamako, in Niamey, in Conakry, in Kinshasa, murmurs grew louder. Leaders who once bowed their heads in silence began to ask themselves, if Traore can do it, why not us? The West called it instability. But Africa called it awakening. Of course, with awakening comes retaliation. Across Africa's history, leaders who dared to defy empire were swiftly silenced. Sankara was killed. Lumumba was murdered. Nkrumah was overthrown. Gaddafi was bombed. The pattern was as old as colonialism itself: resist, and you will pay the ultimate price. That was the fear hanging over Ouagadougou. Not the fear of failure, but the fear of assassination. Of destabilization. Of being branded as dictators, radicals, or terrorists in international media. Empire has always known how to kill not just men, but reputations. But this time, something was different. This time, the people stood behind the leader. They filled the streets, raised their fists, and chanted not in fear but in defiance. The gold is ours. The land is ours. Africa is ours. And for the first time in decades, empire looked not all-powerful, but afraid. The tremble of fear in Paris, the nervous laughter in London, the clenched jaws in Washington, these were not reactions to a small country's gamble. These were the symptoms of a system cracking. And history teaches us something simple: when empires tremble, change is near. The gold coup was not just an act of defiance. It was a gamble, perhaps the most dangerous gamble Burkina Faso had ever made. The government knew the risks. History had taught them well. Every African leader who tried to break free from empire's grip had paid dearly. Sankara was cut down in his prime. Lumumba was handed to his killers by those who feared his vision. Nkrumah was toppled in a coup while abroad. Gaddafi was bombed into dust. The list is long, the warning clear: when you touch the flow of wealth, you paint a target on your chest. And yet, Traore and his government pressed forward. Why? Because the alternative, continued submission, continued theft, continued poverty, was no longer tolerable. The people demanded change, and change came with risk. The gamble began the moment the decree was signed. Burkina Faso's mines were no longer the playground of foreign giants. The gold beneath the soil was now property of the nation. Within hours, legal threats poured in. Multinational companies cried foul, filing complaints in Western courts. They demanded compensation. They threatened sanctions. They called Burkina Faso unstable, irresponsible, dangerous for investment. But in the streets of Ouagadougou, the reaction was the opposite. Crowds gathered. Children sang. Farmers danced. Miners, their hands still dusted with the earth they worked, marched in celebration. For once, the product of their sweat and blood would serve them, not strangers across oceans. Still, the risks were everywhere. Would the economy collapse under sanctions? Would aid be cut off? Would shadowy militias suddenly appear, funded by those who wanted chaos? Would foreign agents slip across borders with plans of assassination? Traore knew these dangers were real. He had studied the patterns of empire. He understood that liberation was never welcomed, it was punished. But he also knew something else: fear could no longer guide his people. They had lived in fear for too long: fear of poverty, fear of hunger, fear of being forgotten by the world. Now, they chose courage over fear. The gamble was not just political, it was personal. In homes across the country, parents whispered to their children about a future that seemed suddenly brighter. Teachers told students that their studies would not be wasted, that one day they would work in industries built by their own gold. Families who once saw emigration as the only hope began to believe again in the soil beneath their feet. The nation was alive with possibility, but possibility is fragile. Foreign media sharpened their knives. Editorials painted Traore as reckless, a populist soldier leading his people into ruin. Experts on television spoke with cold certainty: Burkina Faso cannot survive this. Its economy will crumble. Its leadership will collapse. These voices echoed the same tune Africans had heard for centuries, the tune of doubt. But doubt could no longer win. The gamble was this: if Burkina Faso could survive the backlash long enough to turn its gold into real development, it would set a precedent that could not be erased. It would prove that Africa did not need empire's permission to rise. The government began drafting plans. Gold revenues would fund new schools. Hospitals would be expanded. Roads would be built. The army would be strengthened. For once, the country's wealth would not disappear into foreign bank accounts but circulate in its own economy. Still, the threats lingered. The empire was quiet for now, too quiet. And those who study history know, when empire is quiet, it is only because it is planning its strike. Burkina Faso had taken the first step onto a narrow, dangerous path. One misstep could bring disaster. But if they walked it to the end, the prize was freedom. The gamble was made. The dice had been rolled. And the world was watching. To understand the true weight of Burkina Faso's gamble, one must look beyond its borders, back into the shadows of history, where gold has always been Africa's blessing and its curse. Long before colonial maps carved up the continent, Africa's kingdoms shone with gold. In the 14th century, the Mali Empire under Mansa Musa was so wealthy that his pilgrimage to Mecca shook global economies. Caravans loaded with gold dust crossed the Sahara, dazzling all who saw them. Timbuktu was not just a city of learning, but a city of glittering wealth, proof that Africa was no stranger to prosperity. But history took a darker turn. Gold, once a symbol of Africa's greatness, became the magnet for its exploitation. European ships arrived, not seeking partnership, but plunder. Colonies were built on mines. Chains were forged not only from iron but from contracts, written in languages foreign to the soil they claimed. Gold flowed out, suffering flowed in. In the modern age, little changed. Colonial flags fell, but new corporations rose. Foreign mining companies, backed by powerful governments, extracted billions while leaving African nations with pennies. Contracts favored outsiders. Profits flew abroad. And the people digging in the earth remained trapped in poverty. This was the Hidden Gold War, a war without tanks or soldiers, but with lawyers, bankers, and diplomats. A war fought in silence, but no less deadly. For while no bullets were fired, futures were stolen. Nations were shackled, not with chains, but with debts and deals they never truly agreed to. Burkina Faso's gold coup ripped the mask from this war. By seizing its mines, the country declared, the silent plunder is over. And in doing so, it revealed the fragility of the empire's wealth. Because without Africa's resources, the empire is nothing but paper and ink. The reaction confirmed the fear. Western media spoke of instability, danger to markets, and risk to investors. But behind those phrases lay the truth: the gold war was no longer hidden. It was out in the open. Burkina Faso was not the first to try. Ghana once tried under Nkrumah. Congo tried under Lumumba. Libya tried under Gaddafi. Each time, empire struck back. Leaders were toppled, assassinated, demonized. Nations were plunged into chaos. And the Gold War continued. But now, the stage was different. The people of Africa were watching closely, no longer naive to empire's tricks. Social media carried the message faster than ever before. Across Mali, Niger, Guinea, Congo, and beyond, the example of Burkina Faso spread like wildfire. If they could fight back in 7 days, why couldn't others? It was not just about gold. It was about the principle of ownership. If Africa owned its gold, then it could own its oil. If it owned its oil, it could own its land. And if it owned its land, it could own its destiny. This was the nightmare of empire. That one small, landlocked country could start a revolution not of bullets but of ideas. Because ideas are more dangerous than weapons, they spread, they inspire, they cannot be killed with bombs. And so, the Hidden Gold War entered a new phase. No longer silent, no longer hidden, it became a battle for the future of Africa itself. The empire could not allow this war to be lost. But the people of Africa, tired of centuries of theft, whispered the same truth in markets, in homes, in villages: this time, we will not bow. Burkina Faso had lit the fire. The question was whether Africa would fan the flames, or whether empire would smother them once again. The shockwaves of Burkina Faso's gold coup did not stop at Africa's borders. They traveled across oceans, into cities where the African diaspora has lived for centuries, sometimes in exile, sometimes in silence, always carrying the weight of a homeland they could not forget. From Paris to London, from Harlem to Sao Paulo, the news struck like lightning: Burkina Faso had seized its gold. For many, it felt like a dream long deferred finally breaking through the fog of history. In the streets of Paris, young Africans who grew up under the shadow of discrimination whispered with pride, "Our people are rising." In London cafes, students debated the meaning of sovereignty, not as a theory, but as a living, breathing reality unfolding before their eyes. In New York, in the heart of Harlem, old men who still remembered the speeches of Malcolm X nodded quietly, recognizing in Traore's defiance the same spirit that once called for black unity worldwide. The diaspora has always lived in two worlds, building lives abroad while carrying Africa in their hearts. They had watched for decades as their homeland was stripped of its dignity, its children leaving in search of futures they could not find at home. They had heard the stereotypes: Africa as poor, Africa as broken, Africa as dependent. And many had silently borne the pain of those lies. But this moment was different. This was not Africa begging for aid. This was Africa reclaiming power. Social media lit up with pride. Hashtags trended worldwide: hashtag Africarising, hashtag Our Gold Our Future, hashtag Burkina defies empire. Memes, songs, and videos carried the message far beyond the reach of governments or corporations. The diaspora became amplifiers of the story, ensuring that the world could not ignore what had happened. And in that amplification, something deeper stirred. A reminder of an old truth, one that had guided African philosophy for centuries: I am because we are, and we are because I am. The diaspora realized that what happened in Burkina Faso was not just about Burkinabe. It was about all Africans, everywhere. For the descendants of those stolen in slavery, the coup was a healing moment. For those living in the ghettos of Europe, it was a spark of dignity. For those navigating the halls of universities and boardrooms, it was a reminder that their heritage was not shame, but power. The diaspora had often been accused of forgetting, of assimilating, of losing touch with the continent. But in that week, hearts reconnected. A surge of identity, of unity, of pride moved through millions. Musicians began writing songs. Poets penned verses. Artists painted murals of gold breaking chains. The gold coup became not just a political act but a cultural wave, inspiring those who had long yearned for a reason to believe again in Africa's destiny. Governments abroad tried to dismiss it. Newspapers downplayed it. Analysts warned of instability. But no warning could erase the feeling that, at last, Africa was writing a new chapter, and the diaspora was part of it. Because when one nation stands, it reminds all of us that freedom is possible. And when the diaspora sees the homeland rise, they rise with it. This was more than pride. It was a call. A reminder that the fight for Africa's resources, dignity, and sovereignty was not confined to its borders. It was a global struggle. One that connected the miner in Burkina Faso to the student in Paris, the farmer in Ouagadougou to the activist in New York. The diaspora was awake. And once awake, it would not sleep again.